When my brother would come into my room at night, my soul would leave my body to avoid feeling what was happening. "If you open your mouth, everyone in this house will pay," he whispered. What he didn't know was that my 5 years of silence were storing the perfect weapon against him. Good morning, my dear friends. What an immense joy to be here with you on this beautiful August morning. I'm Irene Adams, 73 years young, currently living in Biloxi, Mississippi, though I was born in a small town called Millfield in rural Kentucky. They say I'm one of those women who can't sit still, always cooking up something new, and I reckon they're right. You know what I love doing these days? Restoring antique furniture. That's right, my loves. This craft that seems like a man's job became my passion after I turned 60. I have a little workshop in my backyard full of tools, sandpaper, brushes, and paints. You should see how I get covered in sawdust with calloused hands, but my heart's so full of joy when I transform a piece headed for the dump into something beautiful again. I started this work when my husband passed away, going on 8 years now. I found an old dresser in the garage that belonged to his family. It was falling apart, riddled with woodworm. The kids wanted to throw it out, but I felt that wood still had life in it. I spent 3 whole months stripping, sanding, treating, painting. It was as if each stroke of sandpaper was also smoothing the sharp edges of grief inside me. When I finished, I placed it in the living room, and neighbors started bringing me their abandoned pieces. Today I have a small but loyal clientele, you know? People bring me broken chairs, forgotten side tables, china cabinets from grandmothers that nobody wants anymore. And I find a way to bring these pieces back to life. Each piece has a story, and while I work on them, I tell them my own stories. It's like the wood absorbs everything, the joys, the sorrows, the secrets. I'm sitting in this rocking chair I restored from my mother's house. It turned out so beautiful with this honey tone I chose, and the cushions I embroidered match perfectly. Through the window, I can see my herb garden: basil, rosemary, lemon balm, everything I use to make my teas. The morning sun is coming through the window, warming my legs that are already tired from walking so much through life. Oh, my dears, before I continue my story, I'd like to ask a special favor. If you're enjoying what I'm sharing, please click that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories from this old lady. And tell me in the comments, from which part of the country are you watching me? Is it early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already evening when the children are sleeping? I love reading all the comments and knowing there are people from so many different places listening to what I have to say. It gives me a joy in my heart that you can't imagine. Today, I'll tell a difficult story, one of those kept locked in a trunk for many years. You know when life hurts us so deeply that we think the wound will never heal? Well, I'll tell you how I survived a pain that began when I was just a little girl, and how after much suffering, I found my own form of justice. As I apply varnish to this little table I'm restoring, I'll take you back to my childhood in rural Kentucky, where it all began. I was born in Millfield, in an old adobe house with large windows and a yard that seemed endless. It was 1952, a time when America was different, especially in rural Kentucky. My father, August Adams, was a serious man, one of those who didn't need to raise his voice to be respected. Just one look from him was enough for everyone to understand the conversation was over. He worked with wood, making custom furniture. Maybe that's where my love for restoring these pieces comes from today. His hands were rough as coarse sandpaper, but the furniture that came from them had a finish that felt like silk. My mother, Zena, was the opposite, small, soft-spoken, always wearing an apron and smelling of fresh herbs. She spent her days between the wood stove and the sewing machine, making clothes to help with expenses. She had sad eyes, the kind that seem to hold stories no one has ever heard. Back then, I didn't understand that look, but today I know she carried her own silences. We were 5 siblings. Me, the middle child, had 2 younger sisters, Olivia and Teresa, and 2 older brothers, Gerald and Theodore. Gerald was the oldest of all, already 19 when I was only 7. Tall, strong, a man of few words but many orders. He was my father's right-hand man in the woodshop, and the only one who dared stand up to that stern man. Theodore was 6 years older than me, a quiet boy who liked to draw and was afraid of the dark. Our house was simple, but to me it seemed like a palace. In the front, the living room with a dark leather sofa that creaked when we sat on it, and a large radio in the corner that could only be turned on after my father came home from work. The kitchen was in the back, with a long oak table where we all ate together. The bedrooms were in a hallway. My parents in one corner, we girls shared one, and my brothers another. The backyard, that was my little piece of paradise. It had apple trees, cherry trees, blackberries, and even a golden maple that bloomed every October, covering the ground with a golden carpet. There was also a fresh water spring that came straight from a natural source, always cool. That's where I played with dolls with Olivia, made mud pies with leaves, and hid when I wanted to be alone. My childhood was like any girl's from the countryside back then. I woke up with the rooster's crow, helped Mom collect eggs from the hen house, walked to the county school on foot. About a 20-minute walk down a red dirt road that stained our feet. The school was a little white house with only 3 classrooms. Several grades studied together with Miss Dervaline, a lady with glasses perched on the tip of her nose who knew all of Walt Whitman's poems by heart. I loved studying, you know. I was good at English and history, but math always gave me trouble. My notebook was a model of neat handwriting, and the teacher always asked me to read aloud to the class. This made Theodore jealous. He was terrible at school and always got scolded at home because of his grades. The afternoons after school were full of chores. Helping Mom wash clothes in the tub, hanging them on the line, peeling potatoes for dinner, sweeping the yard. When there was time left, I'd join the neighborhood girls, especially Gina and Ivy, to play ring around the rosy, jump rope, or jacks with stones we picked up on the way to school. The nights in Millfield were starry, with a sky so clear you could see the entire Milky Way, like a strip of spilled milk. After dinner, we'd sit on the porch to shoot the breeze, as my father called it. He'd tell stories about his youth when he left Virginia as a young man to try his luck in Kentucky. He talked about his father, my grandfather Isaiah, a severe man who never smiled. It seemed that rigidity was a family inheritance. Town festivals were when life became more colorful. The 4th of July celebrations, with colorful clothes and parades door to door. The county fair in May, when the town square would be full of booths and people came from as far as Lexington and Louisville. During Easter, the family trip to Clearwater Creek to catch bass, which Mom would bake in the clay oven with lemon and rosemary. It was around when I was 10 that things started to change at home. My father was more silent, always coming home late from the woodshop. Mom cried secretly when she thought no one was watching. And Gerald started looking at me differently. At first I didn't understand what that look meant, but my body, even so young, seemed to know something was wrong. I remember once when we were all in the backyard under the apple tree. It was Sunday, after lunch. Dad was napping in a hammock. Mom was talking with a neighbor about apple pie recipes. I was helping Olivia build a dollhouse with twigs when I felt that gaze on me. Gerald was leaning against the tree trunk, watching me with an expression that chilled me to the bone. I pretended not to notice, but at that moment, something in me knew things would never be the same again. That night, I had nightmares about shadows entering my room. I woke up sweating, heart racing. Beside me, Olivia and Teresa slept peacefully, unaware that I was already beginning to carry a fear that had no name. Innocence has an expiration date, you know? Mine expired sooner than it should have, like milk left out of the refrigerator on a hot summer day. And so, little by little, the yard that was my paradise transformed into a prison of unspoken fears, of corners I avoided passing alone, of moments when I always tried to stay close to my mother or sisters. The ring games became increasingly rare, the laughter more restrained. The girl who loved reading aloud in school now preferred to stay quiet, as if words could awaken some dormant danger. And it was thus, in silence, that I entered adolescence, carrying a weight no one saw, a fear no one understood. Adolescence arrived like a storm in drought season, unexpected and devastating. I had turned 13 in March 1965, and my body was beginning to change in ways I didn't quite understand. It was during this time that my father decided to expand the woodshop, building a larger shed on the neighboring plot he had purchased. With this, he and Gerald spent entire days working, often until late hours. I remember the day everything really began. It was a Wednesday in June, one of those with a sky so blue it hurt your eyes. Mom had gone to Louisville with the girls to visit an aunt who was sick. Theodore was at a friend's house helping with the corn harvest. Only Dad and I remained at home, but he left early to handle business in town and told me Gerald would come for lunch, that I should have the food ready. I was alone, cutting potatoes in the kitchen, when I heard the gate creak. I thought it was Dad returning, but it was Gerald. He entered the kitchen with that way of his, occupying the entire space just with his presence. He was 25 already, broad shoulders from carrying heavy wood every day, rough and calloused hands. He stood watching me in silence for what seemed like an eternity. "Where is everybody?" he finally asked. Mom took the girls to Louisville, Theodore's at Juvie's house, and Dad went to handle business in town, I replied, without looking at him, focusing on the potatoes. "So it's just the two of us here today?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something in his voice had changed. I continued cutting the potatoes, faster now, as if that could somehow protect me. "You're turning into a young lady, aren't you, Irene? Starting to look like those girls from town." I didn't answer. My hands were shaking so much I almost cut myself with the knife. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, girl." That was the first time he touched me. He grabbed my arm forcefully, making me turn around. I can still feel that pain. He pulled me close, so close I could smell his coffee and tobacco breath. "If you tell Dad or Mom anything, I'll destroy everyone in this house, you hear me? Dad's already suspicious something's wrong at the woodshop. If he finds out, he'll blame Mom for not raising us right. You want to see Mom sick again like last year? You want to see Dad beat Theodore like he did when he thought he stole money?" I couldn't respond, paralyzed with fear. That's when I heard the gate sound again. Gerald released me so quickly I almost fell. Dad entered the kitchen, looked at the two of us, and frowned. "What's going on here?" "Nothing, Dad. Just teaching Irene how to cut potatoes the right way. This girl doesn't know how to do anything properly." That night, when everyone had gone to bed, I heard my bedroom door slowly open. I pretended to be asleep, silently praying for my sisters to wake up. I felt his weight sitting on the edge of my bed, his rough hand brushing the hair from my face. "I know you're awake," he whispered. "Remember what I said." Not a word. What happened next, I keep in a dark corner of my memory. One of those we try to lock with a padlock, but which always finds a crack to escape in nightmares. For the next 3 years, the nighttime visits became routine. I learned to read the signs: when Dad drank too much at dinner and fell into deep sleep, when Mom took chamomile tea for her headaches, when Theodore went out to meet friends. I learned to sleep wearing several layers of clothing, even in Kentucky's heat. I learned to absent myself from my own body, as if I could float and observe everything from a distance. Over time, we developed a kind of macabre dance, a silent agreement. I said nothing, didn't resist, and in exchange, he protected our family. It was as if I had taken on a burden to preserve the peace of that house, however illusory that peace might be. At school, Miss Dervely noticed the change. "What happened to you, Irene? Where's that girl who loved reading to the class?" I would just shrug, unable to put into words what was happening. How to explain the inexplicable? How to name what had no name even in books? My friends Gina and Ivy also noticed the difference. "You're so quiet lately, you don't even want to play hopscotch or go fishing at Clearwater Creek anymore," they would say. I made up a story about helping more at home because Mom was sick. Lies became my second language. At home, I learned to make myself invisible. I wore loose clothes, spoke little, avoided being alone with Gerald whenever possible. But it was like trying to escape a spider when you're already caught in its web. No matter how hard I tried, night always came, and with it, my torment. Theodore, who was now 19, began looking at me differently, not with Gerald's predatory gaze, but with curiosity and concern. Once, he caught me crying behind the blackberry bush. "What's wrong, Irene?" "Nothing." "It was Gerald, wasn't it? Did he do something to you?" Panic froze me inside. If Theodore found out, he would confront Gerald, and then— No, I couldn't risk it. "Of course not. It's just girl stuff. You wouldn't understand." He didn't insist, but I noticed he started observing more, staying closer to me when Gerald was around. This lasted a few weeks, until one day Theodore appeared with a black eye and a cut on his lip. "What happened?" I asked, frightened. "Had a talk with our older brother," was all he said before locking himself in his room. After that, Theodore started spending more time away from home, coming back later and later, often smelling of whiskey. In less than a month, he announced he was leaving, that he had found work on a farm near Knoxville. I saw in his eyes a mixture of guilt and relief. Guilt for leaving me, relief for escaping. I didn't blame him. I would have done the same if I could. With Theodore's departure, I lost my only ally, even if a silent one. The nights grew longer, the days heavier. I began planning my own escape. I thought about running away to Louisville, where we had relatives, or even trying to reach Cincinnati, where nobody would know me. But I had no money, no idea how I would survive alone. That's when, at 16, I met David. He was the pharmacist's nephew, had come from Indianapolis to help his uncle. He was a handsome young man, with an easy smile and a gentle gaze, so different from the looks I was used to receiving. We started talking when I went to the pharmacy to pick up my mother's medicine, who now suffered from high blood pressure. David was 22 and had plans to open his own pharmacy someday. He spoke enthusiastically about medications, about how they could heal people. I listened, fascinated, not so much by the subject, but by the normalcy of those conversations, by the feeling of being seen as a person, not as prey. When he invited me for a walk in the town square one Sunday after church, I accepted without thinking twice. It was the first time in years I allowed myself to truly smile. We walked around the square, had cherry soda, talked about simple things, the weather, the flowers in the church garden, his plans for the future. For a moment, I forgot about my private hell. For a few hours, I was just a normal young woman, walking with a gentle young man on a Sunday afternoon. The feeling was so good that I cried in secret that night, not from sadness, but because I had tasted a freedom I no longer knew existed. Gerald, of course, found out. He saw us in the square, and that very night entered my room earlier than usual. Who was that boy? "Just an acquaintance," I muttered, fear paralyzing me again. "Don't lie to me, Irene. I saw how you looked at him." He grabbed my arm so hard it left purple marks that lasted for weeks. "You are mine, understand? If I find out you're offering yourself to anyone else out there, I'll have a little chat with that boy, and then I'll tell Dad what kind of daughter he has." The threat was clear. If I got close to David, Gerald would do something to him, and then destroy my reputation in the family and town. In a small town like Millfield, this meant being marked forever, perhaps even kicked out of home. The following week, when David invited me for another walk, I lied that I was engaged to a boy from Louisville, that my parents had arranged the marriage. I saw the disappointment in his eyes, but it was better this way. Better to protect him than risk his life. At night, hugging my pillow to muffle the crying, I made a decision. I needed to leave that house at any cost. I could no longer live like this, being a prisoner of my own brother, having my youth stolen day after day. I would start saving any money I could get, hide some clothes, and at the first opportunity, I would run away. What I didn't know was that fate had other plans for me. Plans that would begin to reveal themselves in less than a month, when I realized my body was changing in a way that had nothing to do with adolescence. In early 1969, when I turned 17, there was no more denying what was happening to my body. My dresses were starting to get tight at the waist, my breasts hurt, and in the morning I felt a nausea that made me run to the backyard and vomit, hidden behind the apple tree. For weeks, I tried to fool myself, telling myself it was just some passing illness, maybe worms or indigestion. But deep down, I knew. I had learned enough from the whispered conversations among the town girls and from what I saw happen to married women to understand the signs. I was expecting a child from my own brother. Just thinking about it, I felt such dizziness that I had to hold onto walls to keep from falling. One afternoon, while washing clothes in the tub, my mother looked at me differently. Her eyes, always sad, now had a gleam of concern that frightened me. "You look different, girl." "Eating too much?" I averted my gaze, scrubbing hard at a stain on one of my father's shirts. "No, Mom, I'm normal." She came closer and placed her hand on my face in such a rare gesture of affection that it almost made me cry. "Is there something you want to tell me, Irene?" For a second, I almost weakened, almost let it all out. The years of abuse, the nights of terror, the child now growing inside me. But then I remembered Gerald's threats, what he could do to my family. And more than that, I remembered my father's look, that severe look that judged everything and everyone. What would he do if he knew? He would certainly throw me out of the house, maybe even worse. And my mother, with her weak heart, could she bear such distress? "It's nothing, Mom. I'm just tired." She looked at me for a few more moments, as if she could see through my lie, but didn't insist. She just sighed, in that way of hers, and returned to the kitchen. At that moment, a part of me died, the part that still believed someone could save me. That night, Gerald entered my room as usual. My sisters slept deeply, exhausted after a day helping with the rice harvest. He sat on the edge of the bed, and I noticed he had been drinking. His breath revealed the whiskey. "You're different," he said, running his hand over my belly. I tried to move away, but he held my arm. There's something here that wasn't before. Fear paralyzed me. If he found out, what would he do? The child was proof of what he had done to me all these years. "It's just wait. I've been eating more lately." He laughed, a low and cruel laugh that still echoes in my nightmares today. "You think I'm stupid, Irene? You think I don't know how to recognize a pregnant woman's belly?" Silent tears ran down my face. There was no more hiding. "And what are you going to do?" I asked, my voice almost gone. He remained silent for a while, just watching me in the dim room. Then he got up and walked to the door. "That's your problem. But if anyone finds out who the father is, you know what will happen." In the weeks that followed, I lived in a state of constant despair. Each passing day made it harder to hide my condition. I started wearing looser dresses, tight bands around my belly, anything to disguise what was happening. But soon it would be impossible to hide, not just the pregnancy, but also the shame, the sin, the abomination I carried. One night, I woke up with strong pains in my belly. I thought I was losing the baby, and in a moment of terrible clarity, I realized I felt relief. What kind of monster was I becoming to wish for the death of my own child? But the pain passed, and the baby remained there, growing as living proof of my torment. That's when I decided I could no longer stay in that house. I couldn't let my child be born there, surrounded by that darkness. Maybe it was God's punishment. Maybe it was just bad luck, but that child was innocent of everything. And if I stayed there, what would stop Gerald from doing to my child what he did to me? I began planning my escape with the care of someone planning a crime. I saved any coin I could, change from shopping, a few dollars I earned washing clothes for the mayor's wife, even coins I occasionally took from the pocket of my father's jacket when he slept. I gathered some clothes, the few pieces of jewelry I had received from my grandmother, and a little St. Mary medal my mother had given me at my first communion. The plan was simple. I would go to Cincinnati, where no one knew me. From there, I would try to go even further, perhaps Chicago or even Montana. I would use the money to support myself until I found work, perhaps as a maid, seamstress, anything that would allow me to support myself and the baby. But I needed an opportunity, a moment when I could leave without raising suspicions. And most importantly, I needed to leave before my belly got too big to hide, before the shame became public, and I was marked forever as the fallen girl of Millfield. The opportunity arose when I learned there would be a church excursion to the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. for the 4th of July celebrations. Several girls from town would go, accompanied by the sexton's wife, Mrs. Norman. I convinced my mother to let me go, arguing that I needed to pay a promise for having passed the school year. "Since when are you so devout, girl?" she asked, suspicious. "People change, Mom. I want to ask forgiveness for my sins." This wasn't a lie. I carried so much guilt that sometimes I thought I would suffocate under the weight of it. Part of me believed I deserved what was happening, that somehow I had provoked Gerald. These were confused thoughts from a girl who had no one to talk to, no one to tell her the fault was never mine. On the eve of the trip, Gerald cornered me in the woodshed. His expression was a mixture of anger and suspicion. "What's this story about going to Washington?" "I'm going with the church excursion. Everyone's going." "And if someone notices your belly? Have you thought about that?" "I'll wear loose clothing. No one will notice. It's just 3 days." He grabbed my arm so hard it left purple marks. "If you try anything funny, if you tell anyone—" "I won't tell anything. I just want to pray, ask forgiveness." He released me, pushing me against the woodpile. "You have nothing to be forgiven for. I'm the one who needs forgiveness, but God abandoned me a long time ago." It was the only time I saw something like remorse in his eyes. It lasted only a second before the mask of coldness returned to its place. On the morning of departure, I packed my small bundle of clothes and the few belongings I would take with me. At the bottom of the bag, I hid all the money I had saved. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough to start a new life. My plan was simple. Arriving in Washington, I would find a way to separate from the group and catch a bus to Cincinnati. I said goodbye to my mother with a longer hug than normal. She held my face between her hands, and I saw in her eyes that she knew something was wrong, but couldn't or didn't want to understand what. "Return with God, my daughter. Pray for me, Mom." It was the last time I saw her. Even today, so many years later, I wonder if she ever understood why I left, if she ever managed to put together the pieces of the puzzle I left behind. On the way to the church, where the group would gather for the trip, I passed through the central square. It was early. The sun had barely risen, and the town was still asleep. I looked at the houses, the dirt roads, the bandstand where I had played so many times as a child. I tried to record every detail in my memory, knowing I would probably never see that place again. At the church, the group was already gathering, about 15 girls, all excited about the trip, talking about the graces they would ask for, the boys they might meet. I stayed a bit apart, trying not to draw attention to my nearly 4-month belly, disguised under a loose dress and a shawl. Mrs. Norman took attendance, checking if all the girls were present. When she came to my name, I noticed she looked at me differently, as if she were evaluating me. "Irene Adams?" "Present, Mrs. Norman." "Are you feeling well, girl? You look pale." "I just didn't sleep well. I'm excited about the trip." She nodded, not entirely convinced, but continued the roll call. I was relieved when we finally boarded the bus, an old, noisy vehicle that would make the journey from Millfield to Washington in about 6 hours. During the trip, while the other girls sang and chatted excitedly, I stayed quiet in my corner, looking out the window at the landscapes of Kentucky passing quickly. Rice fields, cattle pastures, small towns that appeared and disappeared. Each mile took me away from the hell that had been my life in recent years and brought me closer to an uncertain future, but one I hoped would be better. At one point, I felt the baby move for the first time. It was like a butterfly flapping its wings inside my belly. I placed my hand over the spot, surprised by the sensation. It was real. There was a life growing inside me, an innocent life which had not asked to be born that way from that forbidden union. At that instant, I made a decision. That child would never know the truth about his father, would never carry the weight of that shame. We arrived in Washington in the late afternoon. The city was packed with pilgrims from all over the country for the celebrations. Food stalls, crafts, and religious products occupied the streets around the cathedral. The smell of food, the sound of prayers and songs, the colors of flags and votive ribbons. Everything seemed unreal after the months of darkness in which I had lived. We were taken to a parish house where we would stay during the 3 days of the celebration. Each room would house 4 or 5 girls on mattresses spread on the floor. I took advantage of the confusion of arrival, with everyone choosing places and unpacking to slip out. I told one of the girls I was going to buy water and left. In the streets crowded with people, no one paid attention to me, just another pilgrim among thousands. I walked to the bus station, my heart beating so hard I thought I would faint. I bought a ticket to Cincinnati using part of the money I had saved. The bus would leave in an hour. While waiting, sitting on a wooden bench at the bus station, I felt a mixture of emotions I had never experienced before. Fear of the unknown, guilt for abandoning my mother and sisters, but above all, a strange feeling of freedom. For the first time in years, Gerald wouldn't know where I was, wouldn't have power over me. When the bus finally departed, taking me to Cincinnati, I allowed myself to cry silently. They weren't just tears of sadness, but also of relief. I was escaping the prison that had been my life until then. The future was uncertain and frightening, but nothing could be worse than what I had left behind. Or so I thought. I didn't yet know that life had many more challenges in store for me, that being a 17-year-old single mother, without family, without friends, in an unknown city, would be just the beginning of a long journey of struggle and overcoming. But at that moment, looking out the bus window at the lights of Washington falling behind, all I felt was a cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, I could rebuild my life and give my child a better future than my past had been. I arrived in Cincinnati on a July night in 1969 with nothing but a small bundle of clothes, less than $300 in my pocket, and a 4-month baby in my belly. The bus station was busy, people coming and going, and there I was, standing, not knowing where to go. A 17-year-old girl, alone for the first time in the big city. Fear squeezed my chest like an invisible hand. What had I done? How would I survive in a big city without knowing anyone? For a moment, I thought about going back to the familiar, as bad as it was. But then I felt that gentle movement in my belly, like a butterfly flapping its wings, and knew there was no going back. I spent the first night on a bench at the bus station, hugging my bundle, waking up at every noise, at every person who passed by. In the morning, I washed my face in the bathroom and went out into the streets, looking for a place to stay. I walked for hours, asking at cheap boarding houses, but when I mentioned I was pregnant, doors closed. We don't accept single mothers, girl. That brings trouble. When the sun began to set, despair took over. I couldn't spend another night on the street. That's when I entered a boarding house in the Oakley neighborhood, an old 2-story building with a faded sign. The owner, Henrietta, a lady of almost 70, white hair and a face marked by deep wrinkles, looked me up and down. "How old are you, girl?" 21, I lied, trying to look older. "And that baby, does it have a father?" "My husband died in a farm accident," another lie that would become my official story. She studied me for a long moment, her tired eyes seeming to see through my lies. "Look, I don't have a vacant room, but there's a small room in the back where I kept my late husband's things. It's not much, but it has a bed and a roof. You can stay there until you find something better, but you'll have to help me in the kitchen and with cleaning to pay the rent." That offer seemed like a miracle. "You don't know how much you're helping me," I replied, with tears in my eyes. "Yes, I do, girl. I know more than you imagine." The little room was small, with a twin bed, an old wardrobe, and a small table. The window overlooked an inner courtyard where the clotheslines were. It wasn't much, but for me, it was the first place I could call my own in my entire life. I worked hard at the boarding house, washing, ironing, cooking, cleaning. My belly grew, and with it, my worries. How would I take care of a baby alone? How would I support it? And if someone discovered where I had come from, what had happened? At night, alone in the little room, I sometimes found myself thinking about Millfield, about my mother, about my sisters. Were they looking for me? Had Gerald said anything? The guilt for having abandoned my family consumed me, but then I remembered what I had fled from and knew there was no other choice. One night, about a month after my arrival, I woke up to loud knocks on the boarding house door. From my room, I heard male voices, and my heart almost stopped when I recognized one of them, Gerald. "I'm looking for my sister. She ran away from home. She's expecting a child. We know she's in Cincinnati." I froze. How had he found me? I held my breath, waiting for Henrietta's response. "I don't know any girl like that. I only have men staying here, construction workers." "Are you sure? We can check?" "Son, this is a respectable boarding house. I don't let just anyone enter and leave searching the rooms. If your sister is pregnant and ran away, she must have her reasons. Sometimes it's better to let people follow their path." There was a tense silence, and then I heard the door close. I spent the rest of the night awake, trembling with fear. The next morning, Henrietta came to my room. "That was your brother, wasn't it?" "How did you know?" "Girl, nobody runs away from home pregnant without a good reason. And from the look in that man's eyes, I could already imagine what the reason was." I started crying, decades of secret and shame overflowing. "I don't know what to do. If he finds me, you need to leave Cincinnati. He'll keep looking." It was Henrietta who helped me plan my next escape. Her brother, Oliver, was a truck driver and would make a trip to Biloxi, Mississippi the following week. She arranged for him to take me. "In Biloxi, you can start over. It's far enough, and it's growing fast. A hard-working woman always finds her place." When I said goodbye to her, I felt I was leaving behind the first person who had shown me true kindness in a long time. How can I thank you? Live well, raise your child with love, and when you can, help someone else in need. That's how the world gets better, one gesture at a time. The journey to Biloxi took 3 days, mostly on dirt roads. Oliver was a quiet man, of few words, but kind in his own way. He didn't ask questions about my situation, only commented as we crossed the Tennessee River. Sometimes, we need to leave a river between the past and the future. Biloxi in 1969 was a growing city, with people arriving from all over the country attracted by job opportunities and the growing casino industry. A young woman with a nebulous past didn't draw as much attention as she would in a small town like Millfield. Oliver left me at the house of an acquaintance, Dervaline, who rented rooms to single women. The place was simple, but clean and safe. With the little money I still had, I paid a month in advance and began looking for work. It was at a small grocery store downtown that I found my first job. The owner, Amos, needed someone to help his wife with organization and sales. My belly was already large, impossible to hide, but when I told my story, the version I had created about being a widow, he just nodded. My mother was also widowed early, with 5 children to raise. "I know how hard it is. You can start tomorrow." The months that followed were of hard work and constant worry. Every penny I earned was saved for when the baby was born. At night, I sewed baby clothes with scraps that Amos's wife gave me. My hands, once delicate, were now calloused and rough, but there was a certain dignity in those calluses. They were marks of a life built with my own effort. In December, when my belly seemed about to explode, I had a disturbing dream. I dreamed I was back at the house in Millfield, at the dinner table with the whole family. Gerald was there, smiling that smile that froze my soul. Suddenly, I noticed a child sitting among us, a boy with the same face as Gerald. He's my son too, Irene. Never forget that. I woke up screaming, soaked in cold sweat. It was that night that the pains began. The delivery was long and difficult. Alone, without family, without a husband, only with Mrs. Dervaline holding my hand and a midwife from the neighborhood guiding me. After almost 20 hours of pain, he was born, a boy, strong and healthy, with dark hair covering his head. When they placed him in my arms, I felt a wave of contradictory emotions. Love, fear, shame, hope. He was part of me, but also part of Gerald. Would it be possible to completely love a child born of so much suffering? The answer came when he opened his eyes and looked at me for the first time. At that instant, I knew I would do anything to protect him, to ensure he never knew the truth about his origin, to ensure he never carried the weight that I carried. "What will you name him?" asked Mrs. Dervaline. "Daniel," I replied without hesitation. It was the name of the prophet in the Bible who had survived in the lion's den. My son would also have to be strong to survive in this world. The first months with Daniel were the hardest of my life. I returned to work at the grocery store just 2 weeks after giving birth, taking him with me in an improvised basket. During the day, he stayed in a corner behind the counter, and I divided my attention between customers and his needs. At night, when he cried with colic, I walked around the small room, singing softly the lullabies my mother sang to me, silent tears running down my face. It was when Daniel was about 8 months old that I had the biggest surprise and the biggest scare since I had left Millfield. I was at the grocery store, organizing shelves, when the door opened and a familiar voice called my name. "Irene? Is it really you?" I turned so quickly I almost knocked over a stack of cans. There, standing at the door, was Theodore, my brother. The blood froze in my veins. If Theodore had found me, Gerald could too. Instinctively, I ran to the basket where Daniel was sleeping, ready to grab him and flee. "Calm down, Irene. I came alone. No one else knows you're here." His face was different, older, more tired, with a new scar cutting across his left eyebrow, but his eyes were the same, gentle and sad. "How did you find me?" "It wasn't easy. I went through Cincinnati, found out you had been there. Then it was following clues. I arrived in Biloxi a week ago. I've been asking everywhere." "Why? To take me back?" He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "To make sure you were okay, and to warn you, Gerald hasn't given up on finding you." That news fell like a stone in my stomach. After almost a year, after everything I had been through to build a new life, I still wasn't free. "What does he want with me? Why won't he leave me in peace?" Theodore approached the basket where Daniel slept and looked at the baby for a long moment. "He knows the child is his, doesn't he?" I nodded, unable to speak, tears choking my voice. "My God, Irene, for how long did this happen?" "Since I was 13, I whispered, speaking aloud for the first time the truth I had kept for so long. I saw the horror in Theodore's eyes, then the guilt. I suspected, but was never sure. I should have done something, should have protected you. You tried, and he hurt you for it. We remained silent for a while, two siblings united by the terrible secret we now shared. Finally, he spoke. "You need to leave again, Irene. Gerald has contacts, people who help him search. Biloxi isn't far enough." "I can't. I don't have any more money. I have Daniel now, a job. I can't just disappear again." Theodore took an envelope from his pocket and placed it on the counter. "It's all I managed to save. It's not much, but it should help. Go north, to Minnesota or Montana, places where it's harder to find you." "And you? Aren't you afraid of what he might do to you for having helped me?" I'm not going back to Millfield. I'm going to Mexico, to work in the oil fields. He won't find me there." Before leaving, Theodore hugged Daniel, who had woken up and was watching us with curious eyes. "He looks like you," said my brother, but we both knew it wasn't true. Daniel had the same eyes as Gerald, the same face shape. At the door, Theodore turned one last time. "You're stronger than all of us, Irene. You always were." After he left, I took Daniel in my arms and hugged him tightly, crying silently. The fear that had diminished in recent months returned with full force. The idea of Gerald finding my son, somehow becoming part of his life, was unbearable. That night, lying in bed with Daniel sleeping beside me, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would run no more. I was tired of running, of looking over my shoulder, of living in fear. If Gerald found me, I would face the consequences. But Daniel would never know the truth, would never suffer the weight of the shame and horror that was his true origin. And that's how I began to build the story I would tell Daniel when he was old enough to ask about his father. A story about a good man who had died before he was born, a man who would have loved him if he were alive. It was a lie, but a necessary lie, a protective lie. As I watched my son sleep, his little fists clenched, his eyelids fluttering in some infant dream, I made a promise to myself. One day, somehow, Gerald would pay for what he had done. Not with violence or immediate revenge, but with the truth. The truth that I would keep until the right moment, like a hidden dagger, waiting for the perfect moment to be used. That night, for the first time, I dreamed of a return to Millfield. Not as a fugitive, not with fear, but with head held high, with my son by my side, ready to expose the truth that for so long had been buried under layers of silence and shame. The following years in Biloxi were of slow and patient construction. Like a spider weaving its web, I created, thread by thread, a life for me and for Daniel. It wasn't a life of luxuries, but it was ours, built with honest work and determination. Daniel grew strong and intelligent. From an early age, he showed an insatiable curiosity about the world, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. At 6, he read better than many older children. Amos, who ended up becoming a kind of surrogate grandfather to him, always said, "This boy will go far, Irene. There's a light in his eyes that's not of this world." In 1975, when Daniel was 5, I managed to save enough money to rent a small house on the outskirts of town. It was small, with just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but the yard had an apple tree and space for a garden. For the first time since I left Millfield, I had the feeling of having roots, of belonging to a place. It was around this time that I met Andrew. He was a widower, about 15 years older than me, owner of a small mechanic shop. He always came to the grocery store to buy supplies, and little by little we started talking. He was a quiet man, a few words, but kind in his own way. When his truck broke down on the road and he needed help unloading the merchandise at the grocery store, Daniel and I went to lend a hand. It was the first time I saw him smile. Over time, Andrew began to appear at our house, always bringing something: a fish he had caught, a tool he had fixed, a wooden toy he had made for Daniel. He never came empty-handed, as if he needed an excuse to be there. Daniel, who had no father figure, quickly became attached to him. Andrew taught him man things: how to fix a bicycle, how to fish, how to plant. And I, who had known only the darkest side of men, began to see that there could exist another type of relationship based on respect and kindness. When Andrew asked me to marry him, almost 2 years after we met, my first reaction was fear. Fear of being under a man's control again, fear that Daniel would suffer, fear that my past would return to haunt me. But then, I looked into his eyes and saw something I had never seen in Gerald's eyes: respect, admiration, a genuine kindness. "You don't have to answer now," he said. "Think about what's best for you and the boy." It was Daniel who convinced me, in a way. One night, while tucking him into bed, he asked, "Mom, why doesn't Uncle Andrew live with us? It would be easier for him to teach me how to fix things if he lived here." The childish logic, so simple and direct, made me smile. Maybe it was time to trust again, to give life a chance. We married in a simple ceremony at St. Peter's Church. I wore a light blue dress, the only good one I had. Daniel, at 7, carried the rings with a comical seriousness. Amos and Mrs. Dervaline were our witnesses, along with a handful of friends we had made over the years. Life with Andrew was peaceful. He didn't ask about my past, accepted the story I had told about being a widow. He treated Daniel like a son, teaching him the mechanic's trade, taking him fishing on Sundays. Gradually, I lowered my guard, allowing myself to be happy, despite the constant fear that my past might one day catch up with me. In 1978, when Daniel was 8, we had our first major crisis. He came home from school with a paper in hand, his face contorted in an expression of confusion and hurt. "Mom, at school they asked us to make a family tree. I don't know who my real father is. I can't just put deceased, I need his name." My heart raced. It was a question I knew would eventually come, but I wasn't prepared. I looked at his little face, so similar to Gerald's, and for a moment, I felt nauseous. "Your father's name was Alexander," I lied, using the first name that came to mind. "Alexander Olson. He died in an accident before you were born." "What was he like?" I swallowed hard. How to describe a man who never existed? "He was gentle. He liked music. He had dark eyes like yours. He was strong and hardworking." I created, right there, the image of a man completely opposite to Gerald. A man Daniel could admire, with whom he could identify without shame. And would he like me? The question broke my heart. "He would love you more than anything, son. I'm sure of that." Daniel seemed satisfied with the answer and went back to his homework. But something changed that day. The lie, which before seemed necessary, began to weigh like a stone on my chest. Andrew, who had heard the conversation from the other room, never brought up the subject. He just hugged me tighter that night, as if he understood the weight I carried. The years passed. Daniel grew, transforming into a tall, slender young man, with the same intense gaze as Gerald, but without the cruelty. He was good in his studies, respectful, helped in Andrew's shop after school. Sometimes, looking at him, I wondered how something so good could have emerged from so much suffering. In 1986, an unexpected event changed the course of our lives. I was at the market I now managed. Amos had retired and sold me the business on very favorable terms, when a woman entered. Something about her seemed familiar, though I couldn't identify what. She walked around the market, picking up a few items, and when she came to the checkout, she looked at me with an expression of shock. "Irene? Irene Adams?" My blood froze. No one in Biloxi knew me by that name. I had adopted Andrew's surname, Olson, when we married. "I'm sorry, you must be mistaking me. No, I'm sure. It's me, Olivia, your sister." The world seemed to spin around me. Olivia, my younger sister, now an adult woman, was there, in front of me. For a moment, I was without reaction, unable to decide whether to hug her or flee to the back of the store. How did you find me?" "I didn't find you. I came to Biloxi 2 weeks ago. My husband was transferred to the bank here. I didn't even know you were here. My God, Irene, we thought you were dead." Tears were running down her face, and I found myself crying too. 17 years had passed since I fled Millfield. 17 years without news from my family. "Mom, is she still—" "Yes, she's still alive, but very sick. Her heart. She never recovered after you disappeared." I closed the market early that day and took Olivia home. On the way, I explained about Andrew, about how I had built a life in Biloxi. I didn't mention Daniel, not yet. First, I needed to know more, understand what had happened in Millfield after my departure. Seated in my kitchen, with a cup of coffee between us, Olivia told me everything. How they had searched for me for months after my disappearance in Washington. How the police had been involved, how they had thought I had been kidnapped or worse. Gerald was the one who insisted most on looking for you. He would leave for weeks, return discouraged, leave again. He seemed obsessed. I felt a chill down my spine. And how is he? Well, very well actually. After Dad died in 1975, he took over the woodshop, expanded the business, now has 3 stores in Millfield, Louisville, and Lexington. Married the mayor's daughter, has 2 children. He's a respected man in town. The injustice of it all hit me like a punch in the stomach. While I had fled, suffered, fought to survive with my son, his son, Gerald had prospered, built a successful life as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't destroyed my life. And Theodore, any news of him? Olivia lowered her eyes. Died 5 years ago. Accident in Mexico in the oil fields. Gerald brought the body back to be buried in Millfield. That news was like a stab. Theodore, the only one who had tried to help me, the only one who knew the truth, was now dead. I couldn't help but wonder if it had really been an accident, or if Gerald, somehow... And you, Irene, what happened to you? Why did you run away like that? I looked at my sister, now a 32-year-old woman, and saw in her eyes the same innocence she had when we were children. How to tell her about the horror I had lived, how to stain her family memory with the sordid truth. I was young. I felt suffocated in Millfield. I wanted to see the world, I lied, hating every word. I was selfish. I didn't think about the suffering I would cause. She didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist. We talked for hours, catching up on almost 2 decades of separation. When Andrew and Daniel arrived from the shop, Olivia looked at my son with an expression that froze my blood. He looked so much like his father, I quickly interrupted. Everyone says that. That night, after Olivia left, with promises to return and keep in touch, I told everything to Andrew. Everything. Not the version I had created for others, but the raw and painful truth about Gerald, about the abuse, about Daniel's true origin. It was the first time I spoke openly about it, and the words came out like poison, burning my throat. Andrew listened in silence, sitting at the kitchen table, his knuckles white from the force he was using to contain his anger. When I finished, exhausted and empty, he simply said, "No one will touch you or my son while I'm alive." My son. Not your son or the boy, but my son. At that moment, I loved Andrew more than ever. In the days that followed, Olivia returned several times. She brought news from Millfield, family photos, stories from the last years. During one of these visits, while Daniel was at school and Andrew at the shop, she finally asked, "Irene, you need to tell me the truth. Why did you really run away? It has something to do with Daniel's father, doesn't it?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment I thought about continuing to lie, to maintain the story I had created. But I was tired of lies, tired of carrying that secret alone. "Yes," I answered, my voice almost a whisper. "It has everything to do with his father." "Who is he? Someone from Millfield?" I looked into my sister's eyes, seeking strength to tell the truth. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe I never could. "It was someone who hurt me badly, Olivia. Someone I feared. That's why I ran away." She nodded slowly, as if she already suspected something like this. "It was someone from the family, wasn't it? Someone from inside the house." I felt the tears running down my face and didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence was answer enough. Olivia hugged me, crying too. "I'm so sorry, Irene. I'm sorry you went through this alone." That night, I made a decision. I would run no more. I would not hide. Millfield was my past, but I would not allow Gerald to control my future as well. If he ever found me, I would be ready. And that's how I began planning my true liberation. Not a physical escape, as I had done before, but a liberation from fear, from shame, from the silence that had imprisoned me for so many years. Andrew supported me unconditionally. "Whatever you decide to do, I'll be by your side," he said. "But think about Daniel. He has the right to know the truth someday." He was right, of course. Daniel deserved to know the truth eventually. But not yet. Not while he was too young to understand the horror of that situation. I decided I would wait until he was an adult, strong enough to carry the weight of that revelation. The reunion with Olivia brought constant news from Millfield. Through her, I learned that Gerald was planning a big party for our mother's 70th birthday in 1989. All relatives would be invited. It would be an important event in town. That's when everything fell into place in my mind. That would be the perfect opportunity. After 20 years hiding the truth, it was time to reveal it. Not out of petty revenge, but for justice. For all the girls Gerald might have abused after me. For all the women who suffered in silence. In 1988, when Daniel completed 18 years, I finally told him part of the truth. Not everything, not yet, but enough for him to understand why we had lived in hiding, why we never talked about my family. "Your father didn't die in an accident, Daniel. That was a story I invented to protect you." He looked at me, confused. "Then who is my father?" "Someone who hurt me badly, someone I ran away from to protect you." Daniel had always been a sensitive young man, able to read between the lines. I saw in his eyes that he understood, at least in part, what I wasn't saying explicitly. "Is that why we never went back to your town? Because of him?" "Yes, but now you're an adult, and it's time for some truths to come to light." "Not all, not yet, but some." I told him about Millfield, about my escape, about the reunion with Olivia. I told him about my mother's birthday, which would happen the following year, and how I intended to return to introduce him to the family. "Will he be there, my biological father?" "Yes. And it will be the first time he sees you." Daniel remained silent for a long time, processing all that. Finally, he took my hand and said, "Whatever you need from me, Mom, I'll do." In the months that followed, we prepared everything meticulously. Olivia would be our accomplice, ensuring we received an invitation to the party, without revealing to anyone that I was alive and would return. Andrew insisted on going with us to protect us in case something went wrong. On the eve of our departure to Millfield, Daniel found me sitting on the porch, looking at the stars. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." I nodded, heart racing. "My father. He's someone from your family, isn't he?" The question hit me like lightning. How did he know? Had Olivia said something? Or had it been the resemblance he saw in the family photos she had brought? "Why do you think that?" "The things you said, the way you ran away, the fear. And there's more. I looked at the photos that Aunt Olivia brought. There's a man there, your older brother. We look alike." I closed my eyes, unable to answer immediately. When I opened them again, Daniel was kneeling beside me, holding my hands. "You don't need to say anything else, Mom. I already understand. And it doesn't matter who my biological father is. Andrew is my real father, the only one who matters." I hugged my son, crying silently. He knew, or at least suspected, but still didn't fully understand the horror of the situation. And perhaps that was good. Perhaps he would never need to know all the sordid details. The next morning, we left for Millfield. 20 years after I had fled, I was returning. No longer as a frightened girl, but as a strong woman, accompanied by my son and by the man who had taught me that not all men were like Gerald. And so, on March 15, 1989, I returned to the town that had been my prison, ready to face the man who had been my jailer, armed with the truth as my only weapon. Today, in August 2025, I am 73 years old, sitting on the porch of my house in Biloxi, where I've lived for more than 5 decades. Time has brought wrinkles to my face and silver to my hair, but it has also brought peace to my heart. When I look back at the long road I've traveled, I feel proud of the woman I've become, despite everything, or perhaps because of everything, I've lived through. After that day in Millfield in 1989, many things changed. The truth, when it finally came to light, was like a storm that devastates everything, but also clears the air. For years, I carried the weight of that secret like a stone on my chest. When I finally released it, I could truly breathe for the first time. Daniel is 55 now, a grown man with gray at his temples and expression lines that tell stories of laughter and concerns. He graduated as a mechanical engineer, perhaps influenced by the years working in the shop with Andrew, and today has his own industrial maintenance company here in Biloxi. He married Elaine, a math teacher he met in college, and they gave me 3 wonderful grandchildren, Lily, 28, who has already made me a great-grandmother to little Henry, 3, Matthew, 25, who is finishing his master's degree in Boston, and Julia, 22, the youngest, who inherited my taste for restoring old things and is always here helping me in the workshop. My Andrew left us 7 years ago, a victim of cancer that consumed him slowly. We were together for more than 40 years, and there wasn't a single day when I didn't thank God for having found him. He was the man who taught me that not all men are cruel, that love can be gentle, respectful, uplifting. In his last days, even debilitated by the disease, he still found strength to hold my hand and say, "You were the best thing that happened in my life, Irene." I continue with my restoration workshop in the backyard. I started this work almost by chance, recovering old furniture that people were going to throw away. Over time, I discovered there was a certain poetry in giving new life to objects that others considered worthless. Perhaps because I myself had been broken and then rebuilt, piece by piece. Today, my small workshop is known throughout the city. People bring rocking chairs that belonged to their grandmothers, old dressers full of woodworm, tables with broken legs. And I, with these wrinkled and calloused hands, transform them again into beautiful and useful pieces. Wood, you know, is like people. Even when hurt, scratched by life, it still holds beauty inside. It just needs someone who can see this and has the patience to do the restoration work. My routine is simple, but it brings me joy. I wake up early when the sun is still rising. I prepare a strong coffee and go to the porch, where I stay watching the birds in the garden I planted with such care. I have orchids of various colors, ferns that spread like green lace, a jasmine that perfumes the summer nights. After coffee, I go to my workshop. The smell of wood, varnish, and beeswax welcomes me like an old friend. I turn on the radio. I like to listen to old songs while I work, and lose myself for hours in that meticulous work of sanding, gluing, painting, varnishing. It's almost a meditation, you know? When I'm focused on a piece, the world out there disappears, and there exists only that moment, that piece of wood gaining new life under my hands. On Wednesdays, I receive visits from my friends for an afternoon tea. We are 5 ladies, me, Dervaline, who is now 92, but still as lucid as ever, Zena, whom I met at the farmer's market more than 30 years ago, Henrietta Jr., daughter of the Henrietta who welcomed me in Cincinnati and who moved to Biloxi after her mother passed away, and Dina, a widow like me, whom I met at church. We talk about our children and grandchildren, exchange recipes, comment on the news from the city. They are simple moments, but precious. On Sundays, the house fills with the whole family. Daniel and Elaine arrive early, bringing treats for lunch. The grandchildren arrive gradually, Lily with her husband and little Henry, Matthew when he's in town, Julia, who is often already here, helping me with some restoration project. The kitchen table, which Andrew made with his own hands more than 30 years ago, becomes full of people and food. I always make that chicken and rice that I learned from my mother, back in Millfield, so many years ago. It's as if, through that recipe, I kept alive a connection with my roots, with the girl I was before everything happened. After lunch, while the women tidy up the kitchen, the men play cards on the porch, and the children run around the yard. Henry loves to play under the apple tree, exactly as Daniel did when he was little. Sometimes, looking at that scene, I feel a wave of gratitude so great it almost doesn't fit in my chest. Despite everything, I managed to build this, a united family, full of love, so different from the one in which I grew up. At night, when everyone has gone and the house returns to silence, I like to sit in this rocking chair, the first piece I restored so many years ago, and look at the stars. The sky of Biloxi remains as clear as it was when I arrived here, a frightened young woman with a baby in her belly and a heart full of fear. So many things have changed since then. I keep in touch with Olivia, who returned to live in Millfield after her husband retired. We talk on the phone every week, and she comes to visit me twice a year, always bringing news from the family. Teresa, our younger sister, also keeps in touch. After the truth came to light, at that 70th birthday of Mom's, family ties were broken and then reconfigured in ways we could never have predicted. Mom lived until she was 85. After that party, when she finally learned about everything that had happened under her roof, she was never the same again. On one hand, she carried the guilt of not having noticed, of not having protected me. On the other, she had a broken heart from Gerald's betrayal and the division it created in the family. In her last years, when her health was already very fragile, she came to live with me in Biloxi. It was a time of reconciliation, of healing for both of us. On the night she passed, holding my hand, her last words were, "Forgive me, daughter, for not having seen." As for Gerald, after that day, he lost everything. His wife left him, taking the children. The furniture business went bankrupt in a few years when customers and suppliers began to distance themselves. The last news I had of him was about 10 years ago, when Olivia told me he lived alone, in a small house on the outskirts of Millfield, drinking a lot and speaking little. I felt no joy in his disgrace, nor pity. What I felt was just nothing, as if he had lost the power to affect me in any way. Daniel managed to process everything that happened with a maturity that surprised me. After that public revelation, we had many painful conversations, many tears, many silences. He went through a period of confusion and anger, questioning his own identity. He even did therapy for a few years to deal with all this. But, over time, he found peace. Andrew was fundamental in this process. He stood by his side at every step, reaffirming that being a father has nothing to do with blood, but with love, presence, daily choice. Today, when I look at Daniel, I see nothing of Gerald in him. I see a good man, upright, who built his life with honest work and treats his wife and children with respect and affection. It's as if that cursed blood had been diluted by better choices, by better examples, by love. The truth is that we all carry scars. Mine are here, invisible but present, reminding me of the path I've traveled. They don't define me, but they're part of who I am, like the wood I restore. Sometimes it's precisely the cracks and imperfections that give character and beauty to a piece. I can't say there aren't difficult days. There are mornings when I wake up with the weight of the past upon me, with nightmares that visit me even after so many decades. But I've learned not to let these moments control my life. I breathe deeply, go to my workshop, pick up a piece that needs care, and begin to work. And little by little, the weight diminishes, the light returns, and I move forward. This is my story, a story of pain, yes, but also of resilience, of reconstruction, of love found in the most unexpected places. A story about how we can be broken to the last piece and still find a way to recompose ourselves, different from what we were before, but whole in our own way. And here I am, Irene, 73 years old, sitting on the porch of my house in Biloxi, looking at the sunset that paints the sky orange and pink. Tomorrow will be another day. I'll wake up early, make my coffee, Go to the workshop where an old chair waits for my hands. Life goes on, simple and precious, one day at a time. My dear ones who have accompanied me this far, I need to tell you what happened that day in Millfield in 1989. When I entered the 70th birthday party of my mother, with Daniel by my side and Andrew right behind, the entire hall fell silent. Mom fainted upon seeing me. Gerald, who was beside his wife and children, turned white as paper. The moment I had waited for 20 years finally came when Daniel stood face to face with Gerald. The resemblance between the two was undeniable. Same eyes, same face shape, same posture. I didn't need to say anything. It was Daniel who broke the silence, extending his hand to Gerald. "I think you're my uncle. I'm Daniel, Irene's son." Gerald looked at the extended hand and then at me in panic. That's when I simply announced, in a calm voice, "Family, this is my son Daniel. Some of you might notice how he resembles his father, my brother, Gerald." The chaos that followed was worth every year of waiting. Gerald's wife screaming, people confused, my mother waking up and crying desperately. Gerald tried to deny it, but his own face betrayed him. When he pulled out a revolver and pointed it at me, it was Andrew who stepped in front. But it wasn't necessary. Gerald's own relatives disarmed him. That day washed my soul. Not because of the destruction of Gerald's life, but because I could finally speak the truth. The silence that had imprisoned me for decades was broken forever. If you who are watching me carry a similar pain, I want to tell you that you are not alone. I've learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our ability to begin again each day. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. Life has taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I learned that true strength isn't never falling, but rising every time. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows we can flourish even after the storm. Seek help, my dear. In every country, there are authorities and organizations ready to protect you. No matter where you are, your dignity is a right that no one can take away. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My dear friends, if this story touched your heart, please click the like button right now and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. Each subscription gives me strength to continue sharing these painful stories that can save lives. Share immediately with someone who might be suffering in silence. Your gesture could be the lifeline they've been waiting for. And before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask you to type in the comments the word resurgence. Only those who watched until the end will know the meaning of this special word. It's the process of rebirth, after underground water finally finds its way to the surface, just as my truth found its way after decades hidden. Type resurgence to show me you've been with me on this journey. Do it now, my dear. Don't wait another minute. Together, we can break the cycle of silence that protects abusers and hurts the innocent. Your action today might save a life tomorrow.